最近的加密市场有一点冷静，大家好像都跑去搞 AI 了，加密社群万籁俱寂。但是在这一片的寂静之中，有一位加密圈内的重量级玩家却语出惊人。他说比特币新一轮的狂暴牛市其实已经开始了。他就是 Anthony Pompliano， 圈内人称 Pomp， 那一个将比特币带入了华尔街视野的超级传教士。Pomp 认为比特币不仅是数字黄金，更是当今金融体系之中唯一的非主权货币。他在他最新的节目之中甩出了一系列的震撼数据，从摩根士丹利创纪录的 ETF 募资，到嘉信理财的直接交易布局，再到微策略不计代价的买入，种种的迹象表明，大型资本已经不再观望，而是将比特币正式视为华尔街的避险资产之王。当散户们心灰意冷，都在冷眼旁观的时候，为什么顶级的机构却在争先恐后的入场？我们应该如何看待这场认知差带来的财富博弈？接下来让我们深入 Pomp 的逻辑，看看他眼中的未来行情到底有多么的疯狂。
Ladies and gentlemen, everyone wants to know, when is the next Bitcoin bull market going to begin? And I'm here to tell you, put on your seatbelts, lock in, because the Bitcoin bull market has already begun. Now, Bitcoin's got to draw down from its all-time high in order to be prepared to slingshot back to new all-time highs. We're down about 40% from $126,000. But you can look to see that Bitcoin bottomed around $60,000. We're up about 25% from that cycle low. On top of that, Bitcoin is up just under 20% since the Iran war started. Now, the reason why that movement off the bottom is so important is because it happened pretty quickly and it happened fairly violently. But the more important part is that now Bitcoin has stood the test of time. It has done one thing that institutional capital needed it to do. Bitcoin has been the best performing asset during 7 consecutive financial crises since 2020.
这7次危机分别是：第一次，美伊冲突升级。2020年1月3号，美国在巴格达机场发动了无人机空袭，击杀了伊朗高级将领苏莱曼尼。这导致中东的局势瞬间紧绷，引发市场对战争爆发以及石油供应中断的强烈担忧，避险情绪迅速升温。第二次，新冠疫情爆发。2020年3月11号，世卫组织正式宣布新冠肺炎为全球大流行。随后，全球多国进入封锁状态，经济活动停摆，导致美股多次熔断，全球金融市场陷入恐慌性的抛售。第三次，俄罗斯入侵乌克兰。2020年2月24日，俄罗斯正式对乌克兰采取特别军事行动，引发了2战以来欧洲最大规模的陆地战争。这个事件导致能源与粮食的价格飙升，全球通膨恶化，并且引发了西方国家对俄罗斯实施的前所未有的金融制裁。第四，美国银行业危机。2023年3月9号，以硅谷银行为首的多家美国银行出现挤兑并且倒闭，随后引发了欧洲瑞信银行被收购。市场担心2028年的金融海啸事件重演。第五次，日元利差交易平仓。2024年8月5号，日本央行出乎意料的开始加息，导致长期盛行的日元利差交易大规模的回流并且平仓，这就引发了全球股市，尤其是科技股和加密货币市场的急跌。第六次，川普解放日。2025年4月2号，川普重返白宫以后，实施大规模的去管制化、税收改革和特定的经济外交政策，对市场造成了强烈的影响。第七次，美国和以色列对伊朗实施军事打击。2026年2月28日，美国联手以色列对伊朗发动军事打击，中东地区的局势再度恶化，导致了短期内油价波动和股市的震荡。
Let me explain. If we look at this chart here from OnRamp, it shows that Bitcoin continues to outperform the S&P and gold. And if it's outperforming the S&P and gold, then it's definitely outperforming dollars and treasuries during these financial crises. Now, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a global pandemic, foreign countries invading their neighbors, domestic policy decisions like tariffs, or a national banking crisis. 60 days after the event, Bitcoin is the best performing asset, regardless of what you're looking at. The reason why that's important is because Bitcoin has become the king of safe haven assets. Institutions know that Bitcoin's volatile. They know that they can go and drive asymmetric returns if they buy it and hold it for long enough. But they never understood what was Bitcoin going to do during market drawdowns. What was it going to do during the tough times? Could they take their institutional capital, put it into Bitcoin, and make sure that Bitcoin performed? But the track record is clear now. 7 times since 2020. Every single financial crisis that's occurred, Bitcoin has been the winner. It's better than holding stocks. It's better than holding gold. It's better than holding dollars or treasuries. Where else are you going to go? Bitcoin has now gotten onto Wall Street. It's gotten into these people's portfolio, and it's an idea whose time has come and they will not be able to get their minds out of it. Now, it's not just me saying this though. Let's go look at what's actually happening in the market. Morgan Stanley, one of the oldest investment banks on Wall Street, recently launched a Bitcoin ETF. Many people would say they're late to the game. They haven't actually launched this thing, even though BlackRock, Fidelity, and many others are already in the market. But Morgan Stanley reported over $100 million of inflows in the first week, and it's the single best ETF launch they've had in the history of the firm. Over a century worth of work, this was the best one. If you don't think that that's going to get the attention of people, if you don't think that there's executives at Morgan Stanley right now saying that Bitcoin thing, we may have a business there. How do we go and do more things with Bitcoin or crypto? How do we go find more clients, more assets, and get more revenue from that sector? Of course, that is going to be the talk internally. And of course, people are going to start asking themselves, how do we get more client capital into Bitcoin so we can grow our business? On top of that, you can go and see Charles Schwab doing almost the exact same thing. They're not going to launch an ETF, but Charles Schwab is saying they now are going to offer direct trading for their users in the Charles Schwab platform. Charles Schwab has been around since the time of JP Morgan, not the bank, but the actual person. Charles Schwab is supposed to be the big institutional brokerage firm. But now they realize that Robinhood is kicking their butt. It's growing 2 times faster than Charles Schwab is going. And a big reason for that is crypto. And so Charles Schwab saying that they now are going to turn on Bitcoin trading inside of their platform, that's a really big deal. And I think it's something you can't ignore. And then, of course, we can go to the actual institutional product, STRC or Stretch. It comes from Strategy. It's the preferred equity offering. We have seen multiple days of over $1 billion of trading volume in that. We've seen inflows that are record high. Just this week, Michael Saylor announced that they bought $2 billion worth of Bitcoin. These are massive numbers, and it shows that there is high demand for digital credit on Wall Street. So whether it is looking at Morgan Stanley, whether it's looking at something like Charles Schwab, or you're looking at Strategy's Stretch product, it is very obvious that Bitcoin is now an acceptable asset to these large pools of capital. And if Bitcoin is an acceptable asset, that means that you're going to see less drawdowns during the volatile moments, and you're going to continue to see the outperformance during the good times. And that's exactly what we have seen over the last couple of weeks. Bitcoin is delivering on its promise. Bitcoin is supposed to be a chaos hedge. It's supposed to provide some certainty in a world of uncertainty. And that's what Bitcoin's been doing. The 60-day return around these financial crises is a stat that you cannot look away from. You cannot ignore it. And on top of that, Bitwise, the crypto asset manager, just came out with a brand new report that I think is something every single person is going to pay attention to. Bitwise's report shows what is the probability of loss across certain time holding periods. And what it shows is that if you hold Bitcoin for at least 3 years, the probability of losing money on that investment is under 1%. Less than 1% probability of losing money on Bitcoin if you hold for at least 3 years. Do you think a lot of institutions who have a very long duration to their capital aren't interested in all of a sudden going and holding Bitcoin for at least 3 years? Of course. What is the probability of loss of holding any other asset? Bitcoin is very unique. It is not only being able to weather these drawdowns and these uncertainties around geopolitics or other issues, but on top of that, it is providing the asymmetric return. And that ultimately is going to be very attractive to people. Now, Bitcoin doesn't just operate in a vacuum anymore. It used to operate outside the system completely, and what was going on with interest rates or geopolitics or anything else had no impact on Bitcoin. That is no longer Bitcoin's reality. Now, Bitcoin operates in the global macro environment. And the Iran war, when everything else was selling off, Bitcoin held steady and actually increased in price. But we have to look to the stock market to understand some of Bitcoin's future as well. Bitcoin is much more sensitive to global liquidity or what happens with interest rates than the stocks are. But the stock market right now is showing numerous signs that we should expect a generational bull run in public equities. First, we can look at what I call the 3-3-3. What is that? The stock market has gone up 3% or more for 3 straight weeks. Now, why is that important? That's happened 3 times in the last 76 years. All 3 times, the stock market went up over 30% over the next 12 months. The average return was 33%. So 3% or more per week for 3 weeks straight happened 3 times over 76 years, and the average return was 33%. 3-3, 3333. And that tells us that right now, because we just had over 3% for 3 weeks straight, likely to have a big bull market. But again, you don't have to listen to me. Tom Lee, who's a Wall Street analyst, very well known for many of his bullish calls over the years, he believes the next 18 to 24 months is going to be some of the best stock market performance in our lifetime. Not in a year, not in 5 years, not in 10 years. He says in our lifetime. Take a listen to what Tom had to say here.
One thing that we were at Fundstrat were emphasizing is that inflation adjusted, even gasoline prices here aren't nearly the burden they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even at the 2008 peak. And the war is stimulating the economy, and we can see that in the earnings estimates in the ISM and even the jobs report. So I think the state of the consumer is one thing versus maybe how they might hear in a radio commercial or the surveys, but I do think the consumer is in better shape. So I think the retail investor will end up chasing this stock rally.
And you think as they do, that will power it higher?
Yes, but for the right fundamental reasons, because earnings estimates are higher. The U.S.'s relative position has really been strengthened by what's been exposed by supply chains through this war. And I think as the world investor looks for growth and they worry about growth in general, they're going to buy the U.S. stock market, which is a growth index.
We're going to talk in just a moment about international and whether, you should, not that you have to choose, you can do both, but if you had to pick U.S. versus international, is it U.S.?
I'd still be overweighting U.S. because I think if you think about where innovation comes from, whether it's in tech, healthcare, or financial services or fintech, that's really U.S. companies. And I think there was an argument the U.S. PE should derate, but the war has exposed that the U.S. multiple should be going up.
Really? So that could be accounting. We could get both earnings and multiple expansion this year?
Yes, I think once we're through, this is still going to be a very tricky year because we have a new Fed chair coming in the market. It's going to test that Fed chair. But once we get through that subsequent turbulence, we are probably entering, an 18 to 24-month period that might be one of the best we've ever seen in our life.
Now, the reason why it's so interesting to hear Tom say this is because I also agree with him that the stock market's likely to go much higher over the next 18 to 24 months. But the stock market's already at an all-time high price. And we know that buying the stock market at an all-time high is better than buying any other day. If you buy at all-time high levels, usually the performance over the next 6 months and 12 months is better than if you buy on any other given day in the stock market. So you're buying momentum, you're buying strength, and strength begets more strength. Returns beget more returns. People chase the rallies, as Tom was talking about. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see happen here. But the other thing that's important to pay attention to is that the stock market is hitting all-time highs at the exact same time that consumer sentiment is hitting all-time lows. Now, I've got plenty of critiques of the consumer sentiment survey. I actually think it's pretty inaccurate. But let's take it at face value and say that actually people are really upset, that consumer sentiment is in the toilet. Well, that's where something like Bitcoin becomes really important. It's because Bitcoin is hope to a lot of people. They don't know anything about real estate. They don't know how to select individual stocks. They simply use Bitcoin as a savings tool. They say, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to make money, I'm going to spend less than I make every single month in terms of my daily expenses, and I'm going to take whatever's left over, I'm going to save it in Bitcoin. The sound money principles of Bitcoin are going to provide me benefit.
什么是 sound money 硬钱？在金融的语境中 ，sound money 硬钱，它指的是一种不轻易贬值、不容易被政府或者中心化的机构随意操控和增发的货币。黄金就是硬钱的代表，比特币呢是新时代的硬钱，所以比特币也被称为数字黄金。比特币的4个特性决定了它的硬钱属性。第一，稀缺性与供应量的上限。比特币总量被严格限制在2100万枚，这种稀缺性是由代码和数学严格保证的。随着不断的有人丢失私钥，导致部分比特币被永久锁定，实际可用的比特币数量其实不到2000万枚。第二，高昂的生产成本。硬钱通常必须难以生产，这样才不会有人轻易地创造出来大量的货币来收割他人的财富。比特币的工作量证明机制需要消耗大量的算力和电力，这种物理成本确保了比特币不能凭空产生，这与开采黄金其实非常相似。第三，可预测性。硬钱的发行节奏应该是透明的，并且是可预测的。比特币大约每4年产量减半一次，任何人都可以精确计算出来未来10年、20年甚至100年的比特币供应量。这种预期的稳定性是现在的法币所不具备的。第四，难以没收，难以审查。比特币不依赖银行，只要你拥有私钥，你就拥有了这笔钱的绝对控制权。
And if Bitcoin is going to be tied closely to the stock market in terms of the sensitivity to global liquidity, then that means stocks are going up and Bitcoin's going up. And so you have this double whammy, is that the stock market performance at all-time highs is very attractive and consumer sentiment is so low that it's going to push people towards Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an apex predator of financial markets, and I think it's going to continue to do incredibly well. Don't listen to the haters and critics. They don't know what they're talking about. They continue to just spit nonsense all over the internet because they hate Bitcoin. They don't like it. They don't understand it. They can't believe that something that was built that violates all of their academic worldview could actually be successful.
比特币的发展史就是一部与质疑对抗的历史。从早期的虚拟空气论，说比特币是虚拟的，没有真实的价值倍数，到后来的金融诈骗说比特币是传销，是专门给黑产用的，再到如今的针对技术底层的量子攻击论，说量子计算机会攻破比特币网络，让比特币归零。尽管反对者不断臆造各种论点，试图证明比特币价值归零的必然性，但是比特币却用一次又一次的新高给出了截然不同的答案。
Bitcoin's $1.5 trillion asset. It literally was started by an anonymous person on the internet. It had no institutional support. It had no venture capital. It had no sort of structure. Didn't have an executive team, a marketing budget, or any sort of business plan. But Bitcoin succeeded because it was the best solution in the market. That type of meritocracy is exactly why Bitcoin is strong, it is resilient, and it will continue to win. But now when you take Bitcoin, you combine it with the global macro environment, you combine it with the stock market signals that are showing us that likely asset prices are going to do very well over the next 12 months, and it begs the question, what could derail the situation? In my opinion, the White House is actually one of the biggest inputs, whether the stock market and Bitcoin are going to be successful or not. Let me explain why. We know that the stock market was rocking. We know that the economy was rocking. And then all of a sudden, we went and we bombed Iran. Now, the president was recently on CNBC, and he talked about the fact that he knew by doing that it was likely that oil and gas prices were going to spike. He knew that the stock market was going to get a little shaky there, but he did it anyways. So that tells me that he believes that we're going to be right back to all-time highs that we're already seeing in stocks, and that he believes that oil and gas prices are going to come down. Now, you may disagree. You may not think that that's actually going to happen, but that's what he believes. And during that interview on CNBC, he talked about having stocks at all-time highs and having oil only trading at $90. That's much better than a lot of people were predicting. They were predicting $150 a barrel. So only at 90 has actually been somewhat of a win. But I don't think that's good enough for the American people. The American people, they want affordability to improve. They want gas at the pump to come down, and they want to see all of their assets continue to increase in price. And so ultimately, what we are going to watch is a president who now is headed into a midterm election. And if you don't think that he is going to do whatever he possibly can to juice the stock market, juice asset prices, and get affordability down at the same time, I don't know what to tell you. But what I believe is going to happen here is that we are going to see an absolute eruption in GDP. We are going to continue to see the AI boom continue to accelerate. And we are going to see the debasement of the US dollar, which is going to all feed into asset prices continue to go higher. I think Bitcoin's going to be a major winner over the next 12 months. And I think that the White House is going to be a big part of it. So ultimately, when you take the sum of all of these different data points, you know that Bitcoin has had strength off of the bottom of its drawdown. You know that Morgan Stanley, Charles Schwab, Strategy, and many other large players are pouring capital into the Bitcoin market. You know that the stock market is shooting a ton of signals that suggest it's going to have a very strong next 12 months. You have some of the most famous analysts on Wall Street saying that a generational bull market is upon us. And you also know that the White House is sympathetic to Bitcoin and crypto, and you know that they're paying attention to the economy and to the stock market because of the midterm elections. Everything is positioned for Bitcoin to go higher over the next 12 months. Could it go down? Sure. But also, the sky could turn red and unicorns could jump out of the sky as well. I ultimately believe that Bitcoin bull market has already begun. How high can it go? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. That's for you at home to decide. Do I think that Bitcoin's going to $1 million in the next 12 months? Probably not. But I think that Bitcoin's going higher. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to get caught offsides because they've been begging for an 85% drawdown. But Bitcoin's volatility has dampened. That's why Bitcoin didn't skyrocket to 500K in the bull market. It's also probably why it's not going to drop to $30,000 in the bear market either. So ultimately, who's going to win in this environment? It's Bitcoin holders who can hold for at least 3 years or longer and who understand what they own. They realize that they have a digital, decentralized, neutral, non-sovereign asset. That asset has a finite supply. And ultimately, we are going to see dollars debased and we're going to see demand for Bitcoin increase. And that means that the dollars that you need to buy one Bitcoin is only going to increase. And the Bitcoin holders, the ones who can stomach all the volatility, the ones that can tune out all the noise, they're going to be the big winners. And hopefully, that'll be you.